Hello everyone, thank you for joining today's Lunch and Learn served by the FileMaker team at Cross IT. Before we dig in, remember that you have a chance to win lunch on us if you leave a comment or ask a question during the live stream. That means we'll send you a gift card. So please send us your email address, somehow, some way, so we can contact you. Any database solution is only as good as the data it holds. We can improve reporting capabilities along with general usability by ensuring data conformity in the information collected by our system. For our final Lunch and Learn installment of 2021, Todd is going to talk about some basic data validation options in our Claris FileMaker solutions that will help improve our data conformity. So without further ado, let me pass the microphone on over to Todd.
All right, thank you, Kristen. Again, thank you all for taking time out of your schedule to join us today. So yes, we're going to be talking about this idea of data conformity and how data validation that we're able to do within a FileMaker solution allows us to do that. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to take a step back to a solution that we'd worked on at the beginning of the year. Originally, I thought it was sometime in late spring. It was actually a two-part Lunch and Learn that we did back in January and February, so it's been a little bit longer than I thought. But in that solution, we had taken a couple of Excel spreadsheets and turned them into a FileMaker file just to kind of walk through that process so that we could understand what we're able to do by converting those spreadsheets, the additional power that we have by getting it out of us, just a flat spreadsheet into a relational database like FileMaker Pro. And so that's where we're going to kind of pick up there, because there were some things that we had left undone because we were more worried about just the conversion process. And so that's where today we're going to take those next steps by looking at adding some validation to the file. So let's go ahead and take a look at that solution. For those of you that are regulars with us, hopefully you remember it was a solution that was going to look at trade shows and keep track of the exhibitors that are exhibiting at each of those trade shows. So here we have our view of the file. And so if I were to go ahead, come in here and create a new record, you can see that it just throws up some completely blank record, and then I'm able to go in and start entering that data. But what you'll notice is that this ID number is rather important. And the reason why is that because we use that to then relate all of the information from the trade show to the exhibitors. Because if the trade show would happen to change its name because sponsorship changed or something like that, you don't want to break that relationship between the trade show and those exhibitors. And so by using these internal IDs to do those relationships for us, we kind of hide that from the user, or at least make it harder for the user to make accidental changes and break things like that. So that's the first thing that we want to look at here as we think about this idea of validating our data. So where do we do that? All right, so we go over here, we can do manage database. There's also a shortcut key which I'll be using quite often throughout today, partly because I think my hand is probably permanently in that shape because I've used those shortcuts so often. But this is the manage database. You can see across the top here we have three different tabs, one where we're looking at the tables. The last one is about the relationships, but the one that we're going to be concentrating on here today is that one for our fields. And you'll see that it has the list of all the fields that help us to then describe that trade show. And the first one is this ID number, which is that unique identifier. And you can see right now there's no notes or comments or options over here, and that's what we want to go ahead and take a look at. So you can either double click the row of the field that you want to look at, or you can always come down here to our options button and click that. Now when this comes open, you'll see that we have four different tabs here. The first one is for auto enter options, which we're going to cover in just a moment. The validation, which is going to be, again, our primary focus today. We have a tab that helps us set some information about the storage that is used. And then the last one is specific to Japanese characters. So unless your solution is dealing with Japanese characters, you don't really have to worry about that last tab. All right. So here under validation, it starts off, there's two sections that you can determine when you validate data and also what those validation requirements are. So you can see we can have it always validate or only during data entry, and you can also allow the user to override during data entry or not. And so we're going to look at a couple different examples of what that looks like. So we're going to leave the defaults up here for now, but just be aware that there are reasons why you would not want to use those defaults. And again, we're going to cover that when you're older. All right. So down here in the requirements, there's the 6 different options here, and we're going to jump over this the first one, and we're going to concentrate there on that second line where we've got 3 choices. And especially for a unique identifier, you always want to make sure that it's not empty, because since we're using it to relate to those vendors, you definitely want to make sure that it's not empty, because it needs to have a value for it to be usable. All right. And then you also, because each one is unique, we want to select it to be a unique value. Now you'll notice that the third choice here on that line is to have it validate against existing values, which of course is something that you may want to do depending on the information that you're storing in that field. However, because we're dealing with this unique ID number, we definitely want to have the unique option selected. Now what is nice is FileMaker is kind enough to go ahead and switch that if we would use the existing value option, it automatically unchecks the unique value option, because obviously those two things are mutually exclusive. So we want to go ahead and leave it like that. And so now we've got our not empty, we've got our unique value, so we're on our way to data validation, at least as far as the ID number field goes. So now if I go into create a new record using the shortcut, I'm going to go down here and I'm going to put in the ID number, which it's telling me I'm not able to do. And the reason why is that whenever we had set up this layout way back at the beginning of the year, what we did is we changed the behavior of the ID number field so that you could not enter it in browse mode. You could enter it in find mode to find a specific trade show by ID, but we weren't able to enter in. And of course, that does prevent the user from making any changes on this layout. But what if there's another layout where you forgot to uncheck the box and all of a sudden they can get in and change, and that's where you don't want to rely on things on the layout, especially when it comes to data validation. And so that's where the ID number field, it's telling it's a required value. Do you want to allow it to remain empty? You see here we have the options that yes, we want to allow that, or no, we don't, or we'd like to revert the record. And so I'm just going to go ahead and revert the record, because there's one more thing that we want to do here. Certainly because of the importance again of that ID number, we really don't want the user entering that. All right, so let's go ahead and go back into our managed database. I'm just going to double click there, and then I'm just going to switch over to the auto enter options just for this one, because obviously automatically entering data is certainly going to help with the data conformity, because you're controlling what information is entered. So it's not specifically related to the validation part, but it certainly does help with your data conformity. And you can see one of the options here is serial number, and you can select when it generates it. By default, usually on creation is the best choice I've found, and then you can set it for the next value. Now since we have values already in there, I'm going to go ahead and set it to what the next value is going to be. You can see we can change the increment. You also notice here that I used a prefix of letters. That's something that I like to do just because when you have your serial number, if you have some type of 2 or 3 letter code in front of the number, when you see that record kind of off by itself, you automatically know that, okay, this is an ID for this table versus that table. I know some developers prefer just to have the number, but this is kind of just my preference, so that's how the file has been set up. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to create that value, and then we're going to go ahead and make some changes here, because this is one of those fields that we really don't want the user to override our data entry. So we're just going to go ahead and turn that off. We click OK again, we come back out. We're going to go ahead and create a new record, and you can see now I have my field with a value. And if I try to leave or commit the record, it's going to be saved for us. So everything is happy. All right, very good. All right, so what else can we validate? All right, so another area where you may want to validate something, especially in our list, is the state. Because if you're trying to pull up a list of all of the trade shows that happen in a particular state, you don't want some people to be using the abbreviation, some people to be spelling it out, some people to be using the incorrect abbreviation. So there are a couple things that we can do there. Again, as noted, we could select that it should be an existing value, but then that also relies on the user entering in the first time correctly. Okay, so that's probably not something that we want to do. The method that I've found, actually find myself using it a little bit more over the years as I've gotten used to it, is this idea of validating against a value in a value list. All right, now there are no value lists defined, or there's a couple in there, but not really the one that we want. So we're just going to go ahead and open our Manage Value Lists. We're going to go ahead and create a new one, and we're going to call this States. And so we can pull it from a field, or we can pull it from another file. We're not going to worry about that at this point in time. And so you don't have to watch me type in all 50 states plus the British Columbia. I've gone ahead and created a little text file that I can just copy and paste and put all the values in here. All right. So now we've got, it has to be a member of the value list states. So that looks good. I can click OK. OK. All right, so just kind of not necessarily entering the information in the normal order here. But if I were to go down and put in Tennessee and then tab to the next field, it likes it. However, if I were to go in and put in WE, it pops up and gives me that error now that says state is defined to contain only specific values. Do you want to allow it? And again, we have the option to say yes. If I say no, it drops me there. Okay, just back into the field where I can make a change, or if I wanted to change it to Washington or something. And then the other option is if I revert the field, then it changes it back to what it was before I tried to make my edit. All right, so that's kind of what those three buttons do. Now, let's make another tweak to that validation on our state. And what that is we're going to go ahead and say we're going to remove this option to allow the user to override it during data entry. Okay, so what does that do for us? I'm glad you asked. All right, so we're back here. I'm just going to go ahead and try to enter a state abbreviation that we know that is not correct. Now when I tab out, you can see that our dialog box has changed. So I can either say okay, or I can revert the field. So if I say okay, it just takes me back to that field, and I've got to go ahead and correct it. Okay, so I can set it back to Tennessee or make it Washington, whatever I want to do. Or again, I have the option to revert the field. I can't get past this dialog without putting something in there that makes sense. Okay, so that's using a value list for your validation. All right, so what other options do we have? So let's go ahead and jump down here to the zip code now. And zip code, because of the way the data was imported when we created the file there initially, you'll see that it was defined as a number because that's what it saw that in that column in the spreadsheet. So it just said, oh, you must be a number. So it left it as that, which may be correct. Obviously, if you're dealing with United States only addresses, all the zip codes have 5 digits, potentially with a +4, depending on your system. But if you're dealing with international, like our neighbors to the north, they've got 6 characters with a combination of letters and numbers. So this method may not work in that way. One of the options is, of course, is if you could require a strict data type. You'll notice here that we have 3 options there for a strict data type, which is numeric only, a 4-digit year date, which sometimes can be important if you want to make sure that it was probably more important around Y2K to make sure you had all 4 digits of the year, but that is one of the options, and also the time of day. All right, but we're not going to use the numeric only for this one. We're actually going to go ahead, and one of the other options that we have is we can actually use a range of values. So you can put it that the value has to be between this range and the maximum. And I had to Google this, but I did find out that in the United States that the range of valid zip codes is from 1 to 999. Oops, one too many nines. Yeah, that is our range. So we can go ahead and put that there. We click OK. Again, click OK. And so now if I come down to my zip code and try to put something that is outside of that range, now it says this field is defined. Okay. But there's a problem with that message. Is it really, I mean, we knew we're in the zip code field, but it's now covered up by the dialog just because of the placement. And so what can we do about that? Well, one of the things that FileMaker does allow us to do, and I don't know if you saw it when we were in there, if we go back into our zip code setup, is you can see that we also have the option here at the very bottom that we can go ahead and display a custom message if the validation then fails. All right, so we could put something in there like false standard. If I could type again here today. So we could put a message in there like that. Go ahead and click OK. And now when I try to, enter in that incorrect zip code, it's giving me something that's a little bit more descriptive, probably means something more to my user. This is especially helpful if your field names follow a specific naming convention, but they don't necessarily fall in line with the labels that are on the layout that mean something to your end user. So that's where you can incorporate these custom messages if you like. Okay. All right. So that is zip code. All right, and by number or by the range. All right, so what have we not talked about? Okay, well, I think the last one that we've not really talked about is this idea of validating by calculation. And that's where you can do some pretty interesting stuff that doesn't fall obviously within the range of our other requirements. If something's a little bit more complex, you need a little bit of help to it, you can go ahead and write a calculation to do your validation for you. Now, where this gets to be a little bit tricky is you have to keep the end result in mind, in that it needs to resolve to either a true or false response. Obviously, true means the validation is okay and you're able to proceed. If it's false, then that's when it's going to say, no, you've got to fix something here. All right, and I went ahead and picked the address because typically a street address is going to be some number, like 123 Main Street. So there's going to be a couple spaces typically. There's going to be some numbers. There are going to be some characters. So I have again another simple example that I actually went ahead and wrote here separately, so you don't have to watch me type through all of this. Let me just get that text file open, and then we're going to go ahead and copy it. And I'm going to come over here to validate by calculation, and I'm just going to drop it in, and then we'll go ahead and talk through it just so you kind of understand what's going on in the calculation. These first two lines is I'm just setting a couple constants that I'm going to use in the calculation. These are my filter numbers, and then this is my filter text, which includes all of the values, A through Z, both capital and lowercase. And then what I'm doing down here is I'm just using the filter function to take the address, filter all the numbers, which should leave me with only the numbers that are part of that address. And then down here for this line, I'm calculating this variable as the filter of the address, again using the text this time, which is going to go give me only the alphabetic characters that are part of the address. And then this last one down here is I'm just doing a count of the spaces that appear in the address. Again, assuming that there should be, number, space, street name, space, and then whether it's, road, street, avenue, what have you. All right, and so then the final thing down here as we get in our calculation is that if the result of filtering the numbers is empty, that means there weren't any numbers in the address, so it's false. Again, doing the same thing here, if the text is empty, then we're going to say that that's false. And if there isn't at least one space, we're going to say that's false. Otherwise, it defaults to true. And where that helps us is it's just going to throw up some error messages. And then again, because of what we're doing here, this is another one of those areas where you probably want to define a custom message. And so we'll just say something like this. If I can type again here, this doesn't look right. Okay. All right, so now if I come back over here to my address, and if I just put in a number, okay, so it recognized that, okay, I've got numbers in there, but I don't have any of the text. Now you'll notice what happened there, because it was a calculation that it didn't validate as soon as I moved from one field to the next like it did when we were dealing with the state or the zip code, but it validated once I was attempting to then create or commit the record. Okay, so if we just go back in here, all right, do the same thing. It says, yeah, that doesn't look right. So if I put that in, and it says, aha, so we've got our numbers, we've got our things, we've got our spaces. So if I come back in here just to kind of test it, to make sure that it's all working, if I take out all of my spaces, it says, yeah, that doesn't look right. Now, obviously, this method is not perfect because it's not looking to see if the numbers come first and things like that. So you could do certainly more with it, but this gives you a little bit of a taste of what you're able to do with that calculation validation method. All right, so I guess the only thing that we really haven't touched on is, let's go ahead, and I told you we would find out when you're older, which you are now older, so we're able to go back to that. And that is, what the difference is between, and we're going to look at the state here, is whether to always validate or only during data entry. So what are those, what does that mean exactly? Okay. Well, I'm glad you asked. So we're going to go ahead and leave it like it is. Like I said, we can, if we change, this, because we are doing, data entry, it says, there's a problem. Okay. But what is non-data entry? Well, one of the things that is not data entry is making a modification via a script. All right. So let's go ahead. I'm going to open up the script editor here and just write a simple script. Okay. I'm going to change the state. Make it my initials, because why not, right? Okay. Okay, everything's there. Okay. All right, now I'm going to put the exit script in there just because we'll all sleep better at night with that exit script step in place. All right, so now if I go ahead, I'm just going to go ahead and narrow this up a little bit since we got a very simple script. And then I'm just going to go ahead and start stepping through the script with the script debugger. All right, so it changed it to TW, and if I come back over here, you can see that, okay, the state changed. It didn't give me any kind of warning. Okay, so let's go back into our managed database, go back into our state, and now we're say always validate. Okay. So if we do that, and now we're going to go back into our script again. I'm going to go ahead and debug it, and you'll see this time, you'll notice right here it actually generated an error, which you can see right down here. It says the value is not listed in the values list specified in the validation entry options. So if you have something that's very critical that you don't want to accidentally change it during a script, you can set the validation to always. This also applies if you are working with a import as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. I went ahead and I had actually created this record. So we're going to go ahead and do an import. we're going to add, we're just going to match up all the fields by name. I do the import, it says it was successful. All right. And if I look here, there's my record. I have 19 records. I started with 18. But if I go ahead and show all of my records, you'll see that record 18 here and record 19 both have the same TSC 018 ID, all right, which again is not something that you want to have happen, because that's going to throw off data reporting, all kinds of stuff. So let's go ahead and we'll get rid of this record that is incomplete. All right, so now we have our completed record. So let's go back in and we'll go ahead and edit that ID number now. And we're going to go ahead and switch that to always in our validation. So I click OK. And now let's go ahead and try running that import again. Let's get over here from our file. Oops, sorry, not export. We want to import. All right, I'm going to select that same file. Again, our same import order. Go ahead and click import. Except now this time it says that the record was skipped because of errors. Number 1. Okay, and so if we look back here, we see we actually have an empty found set because none of those records were imported. And I can see I still only have my 18 records that I started with. So again, that's something you're definitely going to want to keep in mind as you're setting things up, as to what can be done to protect yourself in those areas where you're operating on fields that need to be validated, but you're doing so by either a script or by some type of import, and then you need to then handle for those errors when they do pop up. So I think with that, that brings us to the end of what I wanted to share. So I think we can go ahead and check and see if we've received any questions.
Indeed, we do have some questions. The first one is, do we have any options for record IDs other than just a serial number?
All right, well, I'm glad you asked. That's an excellent question. One of the methods that we've started using on a pretty regular basis, and I'm going to go ahead and switch back over here so you can see the screen for me, is that one of the options that you do have is that instead of using the serial number, what you're able to do is you can insert a calculation, all right? And usually typically the most common one in this scenario is that FileMaker has added a function called get UUID, which is the FLA, or the 4-letter acronym for universally unique identifier. Okay, and so if we were to use that, we do not want to replace, because we want to make sure we keep that value. And so what that does for us is that it gives us a very long number. Let me go ahead and I'm just going to go ahead and create a new record, and you can see there's part of it, but if I go ahead and edit, I'm just going to make the layout ugly for sake of time, but you can see it is a very long number that uses information about the computer itself to come up with this unique identifier number. And so that's a good way to ensure that you have those unique IDs, especially if you have a lot of like iOS or external devices that aren't connected to a hosted file and are just syncing information back. That way you don't run into any collisions because you're trying to increment a traditional serial number. So that's certainly one way to go, and it's become very common for FileMaker developers. Also one that's just get UUID number, which is just that. It doesn't include the characters. It's just the numeric digits, and it's very long. I can't remember the exact number of characters, but it's long. So just take my word on that. So yeah, so that's one way to handle that.
Next question. Which validation methods do you use most often?
That's a good question. I would say probably, obviously, the not empty is unique are probably the most common ones, because there's some other methods and techniques that you can use to check like an address through a scripted method. So you're not necessarily, tied to the field validation at that level. But those are two that are probably the most common. Every once in a while, you want to make sure that your years are, 4 digits, or a number is a number. Like if you have a cost or a price field in your system and somebody keeps wanting to try to put in to be determined, or some multiple costs because of what's on the order, that's a good way to make sure that they're actually putting in the $2.35 that you expect for the cost, or whatever the case might be. So those are probably the most common ones.
Okay, and are there any problems with enabling data validation?
I would say the biggest problem is, in fact, let me go ahead and switch over. I think this will probably be the best way to answer that. So we're just going to go ahead. I'm going to go into design mode, and I'm just going to go ahead and delete this. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn off my auto enter calculation. All right, so you can see we've got some validation on the ID number. Okay, unfortunately, the ID number is defined to require a value, but it's not available on this layout. So sometimes that's where you have to be careful what validation you've enabled it and where you're taking your users to potentially add additional information about that particular item or thing or whatever it is. So you definitely want to make sure that you don't kind of essentially paint yourself into a corner, to use a phrase. So that's definitely the one thing to keep in mind. Answered that question.
That is all the questions we have for today. We do have a few upcoming events that we would like to mention as we close. First, FM Berg, the Pittsburgh FileMaker Developer Group, will be taking our customary midwinter break in January. If you are in the Pittsburgh area and want to talk FileMaker with like-minded individuals, please consider joining our next meetup on Wednesday, February 2nd, 2022 at 7 p.m. Due to some scheduling issue with our regular venue, this meeting will be held in an online-only format. Since we are missing an FM Berg meeting next month, we are offering 2 Lunch and Learn sessions in January. The appetizer will be on Wednesday, January 12th at noon, where Todd talks about some tips and tricks specific to FileMaker users. On Wednesday, January 26th, Todd will dive deeper into the topic of the day for our a la carte session. Again, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule and joining us today. If you like what you saw and heard, please click the thumbs up and share this video. If you haven't subscribed, we humbly ask that you do. You can also hit the bell to get notified. Some of the content presented as part of our Lunch and Learn sessions are the result of your questions. If you have a suggestion for a future topic, or if a specific FileMaker problem has you stumped, please submit those topics and questions by emailing us at nutshell@crossit.com. Your idea or question may be the featured topic of a future Lunch and Learn. From all of us at CrossIT, we are glad to have served you. Have a great day and a happy holiday.